I don't know if you guys remember that movie. This is like from my childhood because I'm a 90s child. So there's this movie that DreamWorks made called The Prince of Egypt. Okay, so let's get into it, guys. We're here. We're finally at a point where we're talking about Moses. I'm noticing all of my channels are starting to kind of combine, and like there's this element of jealousy, of envy, and we get to talk about that in a grounded way, in not a judgmental way, because we're always like, ah, jealousy, that's so bad, and like, how could you feel that way? When it's a natural inclination for us to feel those things. And so we get to kind of dive into that and see, what it is that causes that sensation of jealousy for some of us, like why we're feeling that and how we can use that as a tool within our bodies to kind of alchemize an experience. And this all ties into Moses, believe it or not. But before I get into anything, welcome back to the Starlight Haven. My name is Tabitha Romero. I am your guide for today as we head into the Jordan River, as we head into other bodies of water, as we connect in with the moon, as we connect in with Moses. We are gonna be talking about what is coming through right now, what spells are being broken, and what is being restored. And that is what we do here for our Songs of Mu segment. We talk about what information from Mu is being restored to our cellular being, our bodies, and how we as people are connecting with the earth to help with this restoration. And so it is my pleasure to present to you our story about Moses and the Jordan River. Alrighty, guys, we are going to be getting into the backstory for Moses, and it is actually just like I find this story to be so interesting. I don't really consider myself a religious person, but I do love to look at these different archetypes and see how we can relate to them, and I just love some of these stories. But Moses himself is a foundational character within the storytelling of both like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and he is seen as the precursor to Christ and as a prophet. So many of you have likely seen that movie based on his story, which is the Prince of Egypt, right? But in his biblical story, he is saved by the Pharaoh's daughter after his mother had sent him down the Nile, fearing for his life. So this is because the Pharaoh had ordered that all newborn sons to be drowned in the Nile if they were Hebrew. So while he was raised in Egypt, he grew up with certain privileges while his own people remained enslaved. This leads into his running away from Egypt as an adult after unaliving, an overseer who was beating a Hebrew slave. It was then that he got married and became a shepherd. He had lived this way for years before encountering a burning bush in which God spoke to him and told him to return to Egypt and to lead the Israelites out of slavery. Of course, this made him doubt his own worthiness. I'm sure he was experiencing a lot of shame and guilt around having, been somebody who was raised in the enslavement of his people, but he doubted his own worthiness, his own speaking abilities. And in these stories, when God calls, you answer. So this is where the 10 plagues came in, and the Israelites were eventually led out of Egypt. He parted the Red Sea to initiate their crossing, and from there received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. However, he died before he could even make it to the Promised Land. And this brings us to the Jordan River, which he never got to cross because he struck a rock to bring forth water when God had commanded that he speak to the rock. And so he was punished for this, told to walk up a mountain and see the promised land from afar while, everybody else got to cross. And so this river, the Jordan River, through this story carries great symbolic weight for these Abrahamic religions. It represented a threshold, a transient state between suffering and the promised land, and it represented freedom. So I wanted to give you guys some backstory, but this is really where our story begins, is within the Jordan River. Because right now we are essentially breaking a lot of spells that were placed upon this river through storytelling. And so the Jordan River is where our journey begins. And the river is acting as a field guide for our journey. So right away, I could feel these stories creating an overlay, is the best way I could put it, on the river. These were being referred to as sheets that altered the memory held in this river, and they were calling this a codex emergency. And this channel is a sequence that initiated the rehabilitation effort for this memory pool. And so while you're watching this, you and your attention are also working to rehabilitate this memory pool for us. When in connection with this memory, it is felt in the sternum. The overlays here were impacting the receiving of this information, and it was coming through as what they were calling the energy of looters. So when you loot something, right? So where information was taken from this memory, but distorted for an agenda. And so there was this romanticization of these narratives, essentially telling us to ignore some of these spells so that the memory could continue to be redistributed through the collective consciousness memory field. And these narratives were narratives of loneliness, seeded through a hybridization of genetics that felt held in this chamber. And the chamber was directly connected to the male genetic, semen is what, that's what it's called, and was hybridized with the intention of manipulating genetics to feel disease, right? Disease, or the energy of what they called a stampede, especially when these genetics are directly connected to this area. Our emotions are a gift. And so one of these emotions that we experience that I really wanted to talk about, because there has to be an alchemization of this energy around this word, is jealousy. We could also refer to it as envy, but it is deeply misunderstood. And so jealousy itself is what points us to the fact that we are facing separation from God and from ourselves. It is our emotion showing us where the disconnection is actually occurring. So it is our bodies essentially trying to fill in the blanks of what is missing from our memory. Because these memories have been tampered with through hybridization efforts in our water consciousness fields, we are experiencing a lot of artificial memory. So there are times when this true memory is projecting itself to us through other people, but the energy tied to the word jealousy can make it difficult to tap into what the body is actually trying to show us. We tend to suppress it, and then a lot of times it can be us acting out. It could be what creates a lot of warfare. It could be, what creates a lot of greed and like different energies that are actually born from the misinterpretation of this specific emotion. So when we go into the depths of the body, or we speak to the aspects of the fragmented selves, we can begin to see where we may carry this information. It is then that we are able to see when it is actually playing out in front of us with other people within our own lives. And we can honor that the jealousy that we experience here is actually trying to provide us a lens of what is being restored. This connects back to my other video, right, where we are discussing the teenage energies. And this is the same type of rumbling of remembering who we are and creating individuality and restoring our autonomy. And in that video, I talked about how we were essentially done with the rumbling. The rumbling is essentially completed, but now it's time to take action. And so part of taking that action is restoring our memory. And when we feel the sensation of jealousy, we are recording within our body the parts and the pieces that are being, restored within us, that we are seeing reflected to us. So the message here is that the lens is what determines the solution. So it is here that we still strive for joy, even when the feelings come up. So jealousy, for example, is our body signaling for us to move toward what we are encountering so we can move closer to our joy without judgment of the self, without shutting it down through shame. And so the lens I am talking about in this case is joy, and that joy is what creates restoration. So the reason I bring this up in this section right now specifically is because the hybridization of these genetics include the distortion of jealousy as an emotion. And so that disease, that stampede that we feel, it makes it hard to ground into the body to really truly remember what jealousy is trying to teach us, what envy is trying to teach us. That leads us into Moses again, and Moses as a record keeper who himself experienced the weeding of shame that exists within jealousy. He knew the expression of Rama, the unification of the self, as well as the true energy of the sundial. And so there was a couple symbols that were coming up with the sundial. It was the symbol for Saturn, and it was also the limestone cap that was on top of the pyramid. It's connected to time and what we do with our time and the importance of rest and rejuvenation when, in Western culture, we get like 2 days of rest while, the rest is dedicated to work. And so there's something deeply distorted about that. Rejuvenation is always what should come first because that is where we get the energy to create. And so when I say that Moses was sponsored by the sundial, this is what I mean. He learned from the sundial. He knew the true meaning of what the sundial was for. And it wasn't just for tracking time to work shifts and stuff like that. It was also related to restoration. A lot of this is important too because it does help us track seasons and, continue with our cyclical nature. But part of our cyclical nature is rest, right? Nature rests. Nature doesn't just constantly work, even within some of my more witchy side is like, okay, well, if we're going to follow the seasons and what the seasons are teaching us, right? The winter is when we are, following what the animals are doing. It's cold. We're going underground. And so part of that information is also stored within the sundial is the cyclical nature of our being. And, the ancient Egyptians were not the only ones who practiced this. It wasn't just necessarily the sundial. It was also within Maya, those big stone pillars, to essentially track and mark precise calendar dates and to schedule their agriculture because they knew that this was going to support them. They used the sun to do that. And so this is some of that same energy. We've been doing this, but it can get very distorted through different spells that are related to how we are telling people to spend their time rather than allowing them to tune into their own body to decide. So that's part of the record that Moses kept. And my guides will always use this term jelly feet, and it's kind of like when you can imagine your legs are made out of jello because our legs are a very energetically foundational part of us moving forward on our journey. Of course, our legs represent, us actually walking forward. And so when we have jelly feet, when our legs are made of jelly, it's hard for us to do that in a stable, grounded way. And so he knew the alchemization of that energy. And so honoring this part of his path, honoring that part of our path is part of this restoration process that's happening within the Jordan River. And you can almost sense that energy of punishment of the fact that he never got to cross the River Jordan to go into the promised land, that was memory. The water stores our memories. He never even got to cross, and so he never got to receive that replenishment and rejuvenation in this story. And so these stories that you read, the waterways are very important because they hold these memory. And so in a way, it was like God was like barring him off, like, hey, no, you can watch everybody else cross, or you can see this from far away, but you're gonna die before you even get there, as a punishment. And so we got to be aware of some of the narrative that's being told to us that we hold in a romantic way, that we romanticize, when it doesn't really make sense for God to be this punishing God. When, truly what God wants us to access is, you know, the depths of who we are. And these waterways are part of it. And part of that jelly feet that I feel like I'm connecting into now is his way of, he kept that record of the way forward for us to really witness and remember. And this is where my guide Jolene came in. And a lot of these guides that I work with that are related to these original Essene bloodlines they come to me with a J. They always come to me with a J name. So she was our guide for this segment, and she wanted to be known as part of the original Essene bloodlines connected to the ancient Aramaic tribes of present day Syria. And I could feel her remembering meeting Moses, calling him a speaker, and this in turn jogged her own memory about jealousy, about loneliness and separation from our true form, and it jogged her own memory about how these distortions create more enemy constructs that attempt to keep us forgetting. But the restoration of this memory is what creates alignment to the Christ consciousness that even predates Moses, right? This, Moses predates Christ, but this Christ consciousness predated Moses, and what he was a transmission and a record keeper for that information. He taught this information. I'm aware of like the multidimensional nature of our being. And so when I see, my own spirit team interacting in this way with different figures that I've learned about, it creates a bridge for me to be able to cross to restore that memory for me as well. So how do we even connect into the memories that are here? Okay, so as we reconnect with these memories, we're re-establishing our connection to a different land mass, right? And this is located in Spain, called Tenerife. And this area here, and I apologize if I said this wrong, but we are reestablishing our connection to the seas that surround Tenerife. And here I could feel that there was a stargate that was deeply connected to the ocean, the moon, and our nervous system. So it was here that I could feel memories that were called pre-memories, that were again connected to the energy of semen and the mother. And these memories were what would seed the mother and her children and essentially her children, right? They seed the mother and then she births her children. As we reestablish our connection to this moon stellar stargate. And so this moon stellar stargate is a point of conception for the mother's children. And the true meaning of Merry Christmas. This is just what they said to me, right? So when we talk about Merry Christmas, we're talking about the birth of Christ. And so I was feeling this as the conception point of the birth of Christ, in a way, of that consciousness that exists here. And we could feel that this was a play area, essentially a place for play where Christ consciousness is born. And so that is how we start to reconnect. We start to remember connection to the moon, to the ocean, and the true nature of what Moses really was a memory keeper, a record keeper for. And the moon played a big part in this. And so we got to play a little bit in the moon. We connected with that Stargate. We started to have a little bit of fun here. And I was laughing while I played here because I was connecting again into the stem cells and the restoration of the body. And it was here that I could feel that the moon was shining its glow onto the stem cells, and there was a message that wanted to come in from ogres, right? These ogre beings, and they were moon emissaries, deeply carrying the energy of the pentacle. So, the memories of the elements and their own connection to the moon. And this is where we align with ritual and reverence, using the elemental space to interact with the lunar fields, which helps us reestablish our true north. I thought that was just so beautiful because we get to reestablish our connection to ritual, to reverence for the earth. It's like it was born here. I could feel so much of it. And I'm sure there, there are other places where this is born, but I could feel this point of conception and birth happening here on the moon. And it opens up so much more for us when we connect to this part of ourselves. And part of this true north, because we talked about romanticization of some of these narratives, and I will say, when I talk about romanticization in this way of a more like kind of negative nature of like, okay, we're gonna romanticize something that isn't so positive because we don't know any different. Like these are the narratives that we're told to believe. Well, the energy of romance was coming again in here. And so it felt kind of, but I could feel the difference. And I think that was a transmission. So part of this true north was the energy of timeless romance, which was being equated with joy. Unlike the romanticization of spells in the Jordan, that through storytelling, this joy was spun from not being someone who tells other people a truth and doesn't hold remorse for people believing what they believe, right? We want to be able to allow people to hold their own truth and not feel angry at them for believing what they believe, honoring their path, seeing them as whole as the healer should. When we work with people, we should always witness people that we see as whole already. Even if we feel like we are witnessing separation, we see those people as whole, we honor them as whole, and that's part of reverence, right? That's where I was feeling the pentacle coming in. When we believe what we believe without remorse, our story becomes more grounded. It is elegant. And that is when the moon shines its light on our stem cells and we become what they were calling stem clearers. And so clearing out the crap that's within our stem cells, allowing and making space for the restoration that needs to happen with our stem cells so our body could literally rebuild itself the way that it's trying to. We begin to remember how to rebuild memory in the body, and this comes from our knowingness of ourselves, and it helps us rebuild the body. And so when we're yelling at other people to believe what we believe, that's not helping them know themselves. That's telling them, reinforcing what, this world has already done to them and to us. And that is telling them to believe something that, might not necessarily be their truth. What we were connecting into next was this message about the golden moon. The message was that the moon inside felt it's not that it was like literally golden inside, but like you could feel the energy of gold within the moon. And it was related to unlimited abundance. And it isn't miles away from us, right? This connection between the moon and our own heart and the gold that exists here replicates the gold on the moon, and it becomes a coherence with us. And this is where humanity is truly starting to begin its semester learning about the moon and the wisdom that is carried there. And if you want, you can go back to my video that talks about the restoration of the feminine Christ, and this is also connected to that. There is a lot of information here for us that is being restored on the moon. Part of this semester was including guidance from the mole, who, if you know about moles, they live essentially mostly underground. That's where they travel. It like brings a whole new, meaning to tunnel vision, right? They tunnel underground. That's how they search for their food. They can't see very well. They can make out light. But they just basically, for the most part, are blind, and they must focus on their other senses to be able to, essentially nourish themselves and survive. And so that is the message that they were transmitting about to us about the moon. Is the moon is that side of us, the part of us that like we think we cannot see, right? That we're blind to. That is our intuitive aspects, like to connect truly to our spiritual gifts, to our intuition, to be able to fully see the shadow. We connect in with not necessarily our eyes, right? Our I have to see to believe, but here where we are seeing with our bodies, with our third eye, where we are connecting in with our energy body, and we are feeling different sensations within that energy body and our emotional body, and it's all working together to transmit a message to us. And the moon is essential for us connecting into that, and it's essential for our growth as a humanity to begin to connect into those wells of information. And I see a lot of this restoration is happening at night when the moon body is out in the field. um when it's like that's when mom comes out, like she's the energy of the mother helping restore us in our intuitive abilities. And then they transition to talk about the Umbra, which is something that they've been kind of trying to speak to me about for a little bit. And they were talking about the roots of the Umbra itself, that it wasn't about what they call spam. And so things that, like, when you put things in your spam folder in your email, like there are things that like are like, not really fruitful or for us. But it's not about that, that it's about being genetically seated between Earth and Moon, and the playfulness that comes with being seated between the two. Almost like a hide and a seek. And the moon is not a mother impersonator. Like, this was like a very strong message. She's like, I'm not impersonating the mother, that she's a lot of the time referred to as the dark mother, that is impersonating the energy of the mother. And while there was an honoring of the dark mother itself, because we don't shun that either, that wasn't all that she was. That she was tired of being separated from the sun as well, and that she wanted to be, and for people to acknowledge that there is a coherence within her and the sun, and they work as a team with the earth. I was seeing them moving infinitely around each other, not separate but in union. There was also energy coming in related to about money being intertwined with the energy of being a spender. They were showing me that the energy of being this spender, which was related also to our time, our being, not being necessarily used as a currency without our permission, but us being able to witness each other and see each other. And that was part of the spender energy of the currency of who we are as beings. But then the energy of actual tangible money was coming in here as well. It wasn't like you had to choose, like, okay, like, well, if I'm a spender of my time and I want to receive people, like, that money was completely going to go out the window. It wasn't about that. It was about those two being tied in a way that can be healthy, and that things have become cross contaminated, and it reveals itself through our nervous system, and it will start to keep us in a loop of starvation. And this is something that was very clearly being orchestrated, and they were telling us, even if that is orchestrated, there is a choice here where we could make lemonade out of these lemons, right? So it was like there was a choosing of the memory of the spender. And I'm seeing this in contrast with that of the energy of Nefertiti inside of Moses. And this man spent his time and energy to teach and to help people remember. He spent the time with people, and those people spent their time watching him and receiving, and that in itself was its own currency. This is just repeating from my Nefertiti channel, but it was important that I saw that part within him. But they wanted to really, really emphasize that it didn't involve exploitation. And that is where energy here is clearing, is the energy of exploitation. And sometimes the dollar can be used as that tool to exploit the true energy of the spender. And here they wanted me to transmit a word that was from the Hebrew language here, and it was the word Ronin, and it was connected to the energy of song and joy. And so they wanted me to transmit that word as helping with the releasing of the energy of this exploitation. And of course, here I could feel the energy of Sekhmet as well. She was supporting and also releasing the narrative of money. They said that the joy is in the grooves of the spenders. So we went back to that word Ronin, where we were talking about joy and song, and they were talking about this dance, right? And the joy is in that, the groove, right? The dance of these spenders, this give and take, this dance that we do with each other. But then I was like, in my mind, I was thinking about like the actual currency of money, and I was like, we need that right now to survive, right? But what are we doing with that if that's what we need in this situation? What was the dollar becoming as we alchemize this energy? Because I had so much curiosity for this. And this is where Jolene again came in and answered that it isn't an instead of situation. It isn't, we're doing this instead of this, right? It's about sparkles, sparkling and shining, and the sponsorship of the dollar. And so we were connecting into part of that sponsorship is clearing the spells that are being anchored in through Egypt. And when we end these spells, we free the money. You free the dollar. You free the currency. You release enemies and enemy constructs around money. And they were calling it the offline nemesis. And so with this offline nemesis construct felt like was like it felt like being modded in a way, like as a person, where there are certain things that are lying dormant, and so when money comes in or certain signs of abundance are coming through, the body starts to shut down, and we will see, money as the nemesis, this currency as a nemesis. And so our lens was basically shifting and changing with the healing of these spells. All right, so we're going to be jumping back a little bit. We are going back to talking about the Elohim and the teenage templating, and I could feel here that we were witnessing the enemy constructs of being the enemy of Satan's children. I felt this connected to the Anunnaki, and in this like jealousy that was coming from being jealous of the people that were essentially like, if someone is like our boss at a job and they're telling us to do, they have dominion over us, we would label them as, in this case, a teller who tells us how to spend our time and our energy. There's like this dual part to this jealousy, being told what to do while someone else is like, say they're like going on vacation every day while you're doing all of the hard work, and there might be a feeling of jealousy because there's not equality here and there's no reverence for your time and your energy. And so that was a similar feeling that was coming through here, was that there was this witnessing of these enemy constructs happening between what they were calling Satan's children, then those people witnessing that, feeling that energy of jealousy because of the level of inequality that's here, because there is a lot of slavery that's held within these channels of information of those people, and it's not because of their being necessarily, but of what we aren't receiving because our needs are not being met. And that was coming through as its own form of a memory here. that we were remembering, and it was coming in with the word Gentiles. And but they wanted to emphasize using a J for this word rather than a G. Same thing with, like I told you guys, that they always use J's in replacement of G's for certain words, just like Jolene. Um, but they emphasize the J, so Gentiles with a J for some reason. And to extinguish the idea that the word Gentile was born from, this is coming in right now with the word immigration, so that this was born from like an impure bloodline, that anyone who was a Gentile was impure and not of God's people. And so there is also here a narrative clearing. I guess that would be related to these enemy constructs here, related to like Satan's children. It was a big one for me. I was like, oh, but we have to look at some of this stuff, right? And so this is where I could feel, while we extinguished this idea of these groups being rooted in a bunch of yuckiness, we were able to feel that there is golden speech entering into the body, and the energy felt good. It felt blissful. It connects to the spine and spreads out through angel wings, and it brightens our light, and it goes through the whole body and the limbs, and that's through feeling ourselves as worthy to be God's children, or the children of the goddess. All right, so we will be leaving Egypt for a minute in the energy here, and we will be talking about a whole nother area. And believe it or not, these all, well, like the earth is all connected. So, this was a full-bodied healing, full of different parts and pieces. When we connect in with these healings, we jump around in areas a little bit because the nature of the planet. I get to jump into our, oh my God, let's call it the Jesus Jeep, and zoom around a little bit in different areas. And so we're going to be talking about the Temescal, and are going to be connecting into the memory of the Temescal in ourselves, and the energy of Argentina. And I could feel this energy coming in through the tummy, and it was a solar plexus activation. And the temples that were here, they were calling them grandpa temples. And so when I think about grandpa, I think of like elder energy, father energy here, that was grounding these temples in, that we were accessing. So a temescal is essentially a sweat house. They found these within Mayan tribes as well, I guess connected to the Aztecs too. And it says here that it was used for physical, mental, and spiritual healing, and you were led by a guide. The ritual involved heated volcanic stones, herbal steam, inside a dark enclosure to purify the body, ease tension, and foster emotional renewal. It also helped with our respiratory relief, which is important because we're also connecting in with these areas of the body that are healing through these memories. We can access this always within the chamber of our bodies. This is a cellular memory that exists within a lot of us, but there is a tendency to shut this off out of fear of the dark. And yeah, so this was something that we were connecting back into. There was a very deeply spiritual nature about this temescal, where we would reconnect with ourselves and nature through the heat, through the darkness, through that purification of the body. And so, yeah, there is still fear connected to this, that, some of us block out this energy, but I could feel the reconnection to this, that these grandfather temples were connected to the energy of this temescal, and that was helping also reconnect us to the true meaning of what the emotion of jealousy is, our connection to it is a golden connection, and we transport to it as we do our own inner work. And it's hilarious because my AC's been broken. It's been like 90 degrees in my house, so I feel like I'm literally within one of these at all times right now. So when this came in, it felt so funny. I was like, oh God, like what is what is happening here? And it's funny because I get aggravated in the heat, like who doesn't? So um yeah, this has been a funny coincidence, but yeah. And then that was connecting in through Argentina, and that was helping with the restoration of, believe it or not, all the way back to, Jordan, Egypt, where we're healing a lot of these, core fundamental belief systems that we hold as a society that need to heal and to be seen. And so this was also related to Gnostic principles, which I tend to be like a little bit careful here. I don't um dabble too much into like this stuff. They were talking to me about how that within religious spaces that there is a lot of narcissism construction, right? Because some of these religions were distorted to fit a specific agenda of control and enslavement. And so it's not that the narcissism itself is an enemy to us at the end of the day, and it might not be the intention of the whatever you want to call them enslavers to do this, but it is helping us find our fundamental gnosis, our truth as beings outside of the constructs of what we are told is religion, of what is spirit. And so we get to find our truth. I was feeling here too these, and this is a lot of temple work, but these grand temples of Elohim keeping these logs, and that we were essentially headed on the fool's journey, and that there were a lot of pools of water that we were accessing that were along this fool's journey, that were playing into connecting back in with these temples and remembering this wisdom and coming to our own gnosis, because we ourselves, as we access these pools, our memories are not always going to be the same as everybody else's, right? We all have a little piece of the story that helps us restore what we are here to restore and bring us back into our autonomy, our power. This is all part of the restoration process of Elohim, of bringing back the restoration of the body, mind, and soul coherence between the three. And I believe in my last video, I kept calling it Elohi. I was corrected by my team, and they wanted it to be referred to as Elohim, not Elohi. And so I'm correcting it here. So we were releasing during this journey a collar that I could feel connected to the throat related to these, so a collar around the throat related to these genetic chores. And so they were showing that these are like tentacles, and they were related to the Anunnaki. And so because we have released what they are calling the Ella Enchanted spell that we talk about in my other video, so if you haven't seen that one, these all like build upon each other. So because that spell has been broken, that semester for us is coming to completion. The temples are open. And so one of my guides had come in and they were restoring the grooves of Pele, the volcano Kilauea. I could feel it in respite, and I'm seeing the entanglements that were here connected to the Spencer bloodline. And when I talk about the Spencer bloodline, I'm talking about Diana Spencer. That bloodline was connected to some of these different hybridization efforts, and it felt for a while to us that these were never ending. Marriage through just through like love. Just look at her relationship with her husband. You could kind of get a feel for what I'm saying. It was a lot of misery programming that was here and I could feel that it felt like it was never ending, and I was feeling the healing coming in through the sensation of the spine. Like some of this genetic material that was being accessed was being kind of connected in through the spine. And so I could feel that infected fluid was being cleared that was happening from genetic warfare. So this bloodline was seeded through genetic warfare, and so that itself is clearing from our own bodies, and I could feel them connected to the spine. And this was happening as a direct connection to the goddess Pele through the genetic connection to this volcano itself. And then it was to cover this prehistoric data of our genetic bloodlines they didn't want us to access. And so we ourselves as beings, as we purify this, like what's happening here in the spine, we are the access codes, and there is no fine print. And so when they say that there was no fine print, there was no contract to be signed. There was nothing like that we were getting tricked into, or there wasn't things being taken from us. We are sovereign leaders, choosers, spenders. We are the access code. When we say no fine print, we are talking just restoration, just regeneration, relaxation, rejuvenation. And they were saying that this isn't rare. And we are seeing that within an overworked society where, oh God, it feels so rare to be able to rest and relax. No, this is not. And this was creating, and it's funny because we are going back to the Temescal in a way here, because we're talking about the volcanic rock, right? The energy of heat and steam. And so when we connect into the energy of Kilauea and we connect into our genetics, the way Moses came in again once more, and he was showing me like there's, I forgot exactly what it's called, Putnam, like a Putnam square. And I don't know, like if you've done genetic, in like, I think it was a high school maybe, but you would write, for example, we're talking about Temescal, right? And this isn't something that you would actually write in school, but if we were using T to represent the Temescal on a Putnam square, we would be, if it were a dominant trait that were online, it would be a double like T, right? Or something like that. But in this case, that they were showing it that it was like two lowercase t's, as in it was something that was offline, that was dormant, that was coming back online. These genes are being ignited and being restored. And they were saying Elohim is autonomy. It is joy. It is us and our sparkles. And then we started to see this information into the trees, creating a network for access to this information. And they emphasize the need for plenty of rest as this restoration comes to completion. I am sending you guys so much love and joy. Join me again. Hopefully this week I will see how I am feeling, because we are prioritizing rest related to the information that will be coming in with Antarctica. And so I am sending you guys so much love, enjoy, rest, relaxation, rejuvenation. Bye.